Let's go to this now. The Institute for Economic Justice says the country's top earners must pay a wealth tax to fund the basic income grant. And there's been a lot of talk about this for quite some time now, with some mixed reaction, particularly also on the basic income grant. But let's find out, how does all of it work out then with Dr. Kelle Howson, who is the senior researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice. Let me thank you so much for your time this afternoon. So how is it all going to work?
Thanks for having me. So there's been a lot of attention on the wealth tax on the back of a report that was put out just this week by Applied Development Research Solutions, along with my institute, the IEJ. And what that report was doing was modelling different pathways that South Africa could take to institute a basic income grant, and trying to get an idea of what would be the impact of that on the economy. So we modelled 3 scenarios, and we found that in each scenario, a basic income grant produced economic growth and a decline in unemployment and an increase in consumption. So it's a win-win for South Africa. But in that modelling, you're correct, we used a combination of different financing mechanisms, including a wealth tax. Now, I should say the modelling was indicative. It's not a proposal on how the grant should be implemented, but we do believe that the financing for the grant should be redistributive. The wealthiest in our society should pay more to fund the grant. And that might include through a wealth tax.
So some are of the view that, though, if we put these kind of measures on the wealthiest, they've got the option of moving out of South Africa and actually leaving the country and taking their money elsewhere. So how then do we fund it if they decide to do this?
Look, there's no additional taxation that is not complicated to implement in South Africa. So any additional tax that we consider to fund the basic income grant is going to come with externalities, like you mentioned with the wealth tax. But personally, I don't think that that's a reason why we shouldn't make sure that we're addressing the issue of hunger and poverty in South Africa, and the wealth tax is a justified option for doing that. Inequality has grown in South Africa over the past decade and longer. We know that in the year 2000, the bottom 90% of earners had 30% of the wealth in our country, and now that number has dropped to 19%. So wealth inequality is a growing problem, and we need to redistribute income in order to get onto a sustainable economic path.
And I definitely agree with you. Inequality is a huge issue in South Africa, and especially when we look at the poverty level. So should we not then be pushing for more job creation so that people are not reliant on grants, but are also self-sustainable, and making sure that we really take care of the future of the country, particularly the young people who are unemployed?
Yes, 100%. We should be doing all of that. And we're not presenting the basic income grant as a panacea or a silver bullet to all of South Africa's challenges. We need to tackle unemployment. We need to tackle infrastructure and public services in order to make a difference to our economic situation. But what the international evidence says, and the local evidence, is that when people have social assistance that enables them to meet their basic needs, that helps them to build sustainable livelihoods for themselves. It helps them to get into employment, because we know the cost of searching for a job is very high, and it helps them to start businesses. So in the end, people's incomes grow above the level of that grant, but poverty is what locks people out of the economy and stops them from being able to contribute and have agency.
And especially because I'm thinking about, just the economics of looking for a job in South Africa and the difficulties around that. So did you explore the possible option? Because there's another, thorny subject in South Africa that we always talk about, and this is the issue of corruption. We're losing billions to corruption. So did you also explore possibly the amount of money that's being lost there to also find its way towards this particular fund to sustain this basic income grant?
Look, that is an issue, and it's not one that was explored in this modelling. The modelling simply asked the question, if we had a basic income grant and it was implemented in a certain way, what would be the impact on the economy?
Yeah.
So, we have done some analysis of the fact that if we remove conditionalities from the grant and targeting measures that give officials the ability to decide this person deserves the grant and this person doesn't, then that cuts down on the opportunities for corruption. And that's one of the reasons why we're advocating for a grant that covers more people, a greater proportion of the population, and progressively working towards a universal grant, because in that case, there are fewer opportunities for corruption in the administration of the grant.
And Dr. Howson, you raised some compelling points there, but let's see then how this issue unfolds, because it's been talked about, as you say, for quite some time now, and really, one waits to see if there will be any movement in that particular issue. But let me thank you so much for your insights this afternoon. That is Dr. Kelle Howson, the senior researcher for the Institute for Economic Justice.